On my birthday, no one showed up. I stood in my living room at 6 p.m., looking at the birthday cake I'd bought for myself, the balloons I'd hung up that morning, and the small pile of plates I'd set out hoping against hope that maybe this year would be different. The silence in my house felt thick, almost suffocating, broken only by the tick of the grandfather clock my late husband had given me 30 years ago. I'm Martha, and yesterday I turned 68. I spent weeks leading up to my birthday dropping hints to my daughter Sarah about how special this one would be. It's not every day you turn 68, I'd say during our brief phone calls that never seemed to last more than 10 minutes. Maybe we could do something nice together. I could make your favorite pot roast. She'd always respond with that familiar, non-committal tone. We'll see, Mom, or I'll try to make it work with my schedule. The morning started with such promise. I woke up at 5:30 a.m., unable to sleep from excitement, and made myself a proper birthday breakfast. Before we continue, comment where you're watching from and subscribe to the channel. We'd love to see how far our stories are reaching. Pancakes with real maple syrup, the expensive kind I usually save for special occasions. I even put on the blue dress Sarah had complimented 3 years ago, telling me it brought out my eyes. I cleaned the house from top to bottom, arranged fresh daisies from my garden in every room, and prepared all of Sarah's favorite foods: pot roast with carrots, mashed potatoes, and that chocolate cake recipe her grandmother used to make. I kept checking my phone every few minutes, expecting a call, a text, even a Facebook message, something to acknowledge that today mattered, that I mattered. By noon, my stomach was churning with anxiety, but I told myself she was probably planning a surprise. Sarah had always been good at surprises when she was younger. Instead, at 2 p.m., I found a small package by my front door. No doorbell ring, no knock, no warm embrace from my only child. Just a manila envelope with my name scrawled across it in Sarah's increasingly messy handwriting. Inside was a cheap refrigerator magnet shaped like a birthday cake, the kind you'd grab at a gas station checkout counter, and a card that simply read, "Sorry, I'm busy. Happy birthday, Mom." That was it. 43 years of being her mother, of sacrificing everything I had and everything I dreamed of having, and I got a dollar store magnet and 3 words of explanation. Not even "Love, Sarah." Just, "Sorry, I'm busy." I sat at my kitchen table holding that pathetic card, feeling something crack inside my chest like ice breaking on a winter pond. This wasn't the first time Sarah had disappointed me. There had been missed Mother's Days, forgotten phone calls, canceled visits, but something about the complete coldness of this gesture hit me harder than anything before. The sheer lack of effort, the assumption that I would just accept whatever scraps of attention she threw my way, felt like a slap across the face. I'd raised her alone after her father died when she was 12. Lung cancer took him in 6 months, leaving me to navigate single motherhood while drowning in medical bills and grief. I'd worked double shifts as a nurse at the county hospital, my feet aching so badly some nights I could barely walk to my car. I'd sacrificed vacations, new clothes, even dates with decent men because every penny went toward giving Sarah the life I thought she deserved. College tuition, her wedding, the down payment on that beautiful colonial house she lives in now with her lawyer husband, all of it came from my sweat and sacrifice. Around 4 p.m., curiosity got the better of me, and I opened Facebook on my phone. I rarely used social media, but Sarah was always posting photos, and I couldn't help checking to see what was so important that she couldn't spare a few hours for her mother's birthday. I shouldn't have looked, but I couldn't stop myself. There it was, posted just an hour earlier, a photo of Sarah on what looked like a luxury cruise ship, her arms wrapped around an elegant older couple I recognized as her in-laws, Linda and Robert. Sarah was wearing a designer sundress I'd never seen before, her hair professionally styled, diamond earrings catching the Caribbean sunlight. She looked radiant, genuinely happy in a way I hadn't seen in years. The caption made my stomach drop and my hands tremble. "Living my best life with my dream parents. So grateful for Linda and Robert who always make me feel so loved and cherished. This cruise is exactly what I needed. Blessed, dream parents, family love. My dream parents." Those 3 words echoed in my head as I stared at Sarah's radiant smile in the photo. She looked happier than she ever looked when visiting me. The way she leaned into Linda with such comfort and affection, the genuine joy radiating from her face, the expensive cruise they'd clearly paid for without batting an eye. It was everything I'd never been able to give her, everything I'd failed to be. I scrolled through the comments with masochistic fascination, each one a small knife in my already bleeding heart. "You deserve parents who spoil you, honey. Linda and Robert are absolute angels. This is what real family looks like. So happy you found your people." Sarah had responded to each comment with heart emojis and gushing responses. "They understand me like no one else ever has. Finally found where I belong. They treat me like the daughter they never had. the daughter they never had, as if I were some stranger who'd been pretending to be her mother for 43 years. I set my phone down with shaking hands and looked around my empty house. The decorations I'd hung that morning seemed to mock me now. Colorful streamers hanging limply from the ceiling, balloons starting to deflate in the corners. The pot roast was getting cold in the oven, filling the house with the smell of a meal no one would eat. The cake sat untouched on the counter, "Happy Birthday, Martha," written in cheerful blue frosting, a monument to my own pathetic optimism. How many birthdays had I spent alone while Sarah lived it up with the people who could afford to give her the life I never could? How many holidays had I waited by the phone while she created new traditions with her real family? I thought back to her wedding 5 years ago, how she'd insisted on Linda planning everything because she has such refined taste and knows all the best vendors. I'd offered to help, to contribute something meaningful, but Sarah had waved me off with an awkward laugh. "It's okay, Mom. Linda's got it handled." I'd ended up sitting in the back during the ceremony, watching as Linda walked Sarah down the aisle because Robert's back was acting up, watching as Linda gave the mother of the bride speech I'd practiced for weeks but was never asked to give. I thought about Christmas last year when Sarah spent exactly 45 minutes at my house. I'd timed it. Before rushing off to Linda and Robert's elaborate celebration complete with catered dinner and professionally wrapped gifts. "Sorry, Mom, but we promised we'd be there for the gift exchange." She'd left me sitting alone with the homemade cookies I'd baked and the modest presents I'd wrapped so carefully. I thought about my grandchildren, Emma and Jake, who barely knew my name because Sarah was always too busy, too tired, too something to bring them by for visits. They called Linda Grandma while I remained a distant Martha in their lives. The truth was crystallizing with painful clarity. I wasn't Sarah's mother anymore, not in any way that mattered. I was an obligation, a burden, someone she endured out of guilt while reserving her love, gratitude, and precious time for the people who could afford to shower her with luxury cruises and designer gifts. As evening settled around my empty house and my birthday officially became just another forgotten day, I felt something profound shifting inside me. The hurt was still there, sharp and fresh like a wound that wouldn't heal, but underneath it was growing something else. Not just anger, though there was plenty of that. It was clarity, cold and bright as winter starlight. For the first time in decades, I was seeing my relationship with Sarah for what it really was, and I didn't like what I saw. The week after my birthday passed in a strange haze. I kept expecting Sarah to call, maybe with an explanation, or even a belated acknowledgement of the day she'd completely ignored. But my phone remained stubbornly silent except for the occasional telemarketer or automated reminder from my doctor's office. I found myself doing something I'd never done before, really examining the patterns of our relationship instead of making excuses for them. It was like looking at a familiar painting from a different angle, and suddenly seeing all the flaws you'd been blind to before. I started with something simple, going through my phone to count how many times Sarah had actually initiated contact with me over the past year. The results were devastating. In 12 months, she had called me exactly 4 times, and 3 of those calls were to ask for favors. Could I babysit Emma and Jake when their regular sitter canceled? Could I drive her to the airport because David was out of town? Could I help her move some furniture because she couldn't afford the movers she wanted? The 4th call had been in March when she needed someone to co-sign for a loan to renovate their kitchen. I'd agreed immediately, of course, because that's what mothers do. They help their children achieve their dreams, even when those dreams cost $40,000 and leave the mother's own savings account dangerously thin. I pulled out my checkbook and started adding up all the money I'd given Sarah over the past 5 years. The kitchen renovation, the car payment I'd covered when David was between jobs, the credit card debt I'd helped them pay off, the vacation fund I'd contributed to for their anniversary trip to Europe. The number made me feel sick. I'd given her nearly $80,000 while living on a fixed income, denying myself basic comfort so she could maintain the lifestyle she'd grown accustomed to. And what had I gotten in return? A gas station magnet and 3 words on a card. I decided to look deeper. Scrolling through Sarah's Facebook posts from the past year, what I found there painted a picture that made my heart ache with a different kind of pain. Post after post showed Sarah's life with Linda and Robert. Spa days with Linda, golf outings with Robert, family dinners at expensive restaurants, weekend trips to their lake house, holiday celebrations that looked like something from a magazine. In all those photos, spanning an entire year of Sarah's life, I appeared in exactly 0. It was as if I didn't exist in her world at all. But Linda was everywhere. Linda helping Sarah pick out clothes for work events. Linda babysitting Emma and Jake while Sarah and David went on dates. Linda teaching Sarah how to arrange flowers for a dinner party. Linda and Sarah laughing together over wine and what looked like inside jokes I would never understand. I found one post from Mother's Day that nearly broke me. Sarah had written a long, gushing tribute to Linda, calling her the mother who chose to love me unconditionally, And the woman who taught me what real family looks like. The post had dozens of comments and likes, with Sarah responding to each one about how grateful she was to have Linda in her life. I remembered that Mother's Day clearly. I'd waited all day for a call, a text, a visit. Nothing came. I'd finally called Sarah myself that evening, and she'd seemed distracted, rushing to get off the phone because they were just sitting down to dinner at Linda and Robert's. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about a conversation Sarah and I had when she first started dating David 8 years ago. She'd been nervous about meeting his parents, worried they wouldn't like her because she came from a more modest background. What if they think I'm not good enough for their son? She'd asked me over coffee in my kitchen. I'd taken her hands in mine and told her what I truly believed. Honey, if they can't see how wonderful you are, that's their loss. You're kind, smart, beautiful, and any family would be lucky to have you. Just be yourself. How ironic that my own words had come back to haunt me. Linda and Robert had seen how wonderful Sarah was, and they'd claimed her as their own. They'd given her everything I couldn't. Financial security, social status, the kind of effortless elegance that comes with generational wealth. And Sarah had embraced it all, leaving me behind like an old coat she'd outgrown. The next morning, I decided to do something I'd never done before. I called Sarah, not to ask for anything, not to remind her of some obligation, but just to hear her voice and maybe understand where we stood. She answered on the fourth ring, and I could hear the ocean in the background. They were still on the cruise. "Oh, hi, Mom," she said, and I could hear the slight irritation in her voice at being interrupted. "What's going on?" "I just wanted to hear how your trip is going," I said, trying to keep my voice light. "The photos look beautiful." "Yeah, it's amazing. Linda and Robert really outdid themselves this time. We're in the Virgin Islands today, and tomorrow we're going snorkeling in some private cove Robert knows about." I waited for her to ask about my birthday, to acknowledge that she'd missed it, to show even the slightest hint of regret. Instead, she launched into a detailed description of the ship's amenities and how wonderful Linda was for thinking of everything. "That sounds lovely," I managed. "I'm glad you're having such a good time." "Yeah, I really needed this break. Things have been so stressful lately with work and the kids' schedules. Linda always knows exactly what I need to recharge." Linda always knows. Not, "Mom, I should have spent my birthday with you." Not, "I'm sorry I only sent you a card." Just more praise for the woman who'd somehow become more important to my daughter than I ever was. "Sarah," I said, my voice carefully controlled, "do you remember what day my birthday was?" A pause. "Of course I do, Mom. It was last Tuesday. I sent you that card, remember?" "Yes, I remember the card," I said quietly. "I was just wondering if you might want to do something together when you get back. Maybe have dinner, just the two of us?" Another pause. Longer this time. "I don't know, Mom. We'll be pretty tired when we get back, and Linda's already planned this welcome home party for us. Maybe sometime later?" Sometime later. The phrase hung in the air between us like a broken promise. "Of course," I said. "Well, I should let you get back to your vacation." "Okay, I'll talk to you later, Mom." She hung up without saying she loved me, without asking how I was doing, without showing the slightest interest in my life beyond that perfunctory phone call. I sat in my kitchen holding my silent phone, and something fundamental shifted inside me. For 43 years, I'd made excuses for Sarah's behavior, told myself she was just busy, just young, just figuring out her life. But she wasn't young anymore. She was 36 years old, a mother herself, and she'd made her choices clear. She'd chosen Linda and Robert. She'd chosen their money, their status, their effortless ability to give her everything she wanted without requiring anything in return. And she'd chosen to relegate me to the role of emergency contact and occasional favor granter. That afternoon, I did something I'd never done before. I stopped making excuses for my daughter and started making plans for myself. I opened my laptop and began researching something I'd always dreamed about but never thought I could afford: traveling. I'd spent my entire adult life taking care of other people. First my husband during his illness, then Sarah as a single mother, then my aging parents until they passed. I'd never been anywhere except the neighboring states. Never seen an ocean or a mountain range or any of the places I dreamed about visiting. But I had money now. Not the money I'd been saving for Sarah's future emergencies or her children's college funds, but money I could spend on myself without guilt. I'd been so focused on being available for my daughter that I'd forgotten I had my own life to live. For the first time in years, maybe decades, I felt something I'd almost forgotten existed: excitement for my own future. A future that didn't revolve around waiting for Sarah to need me or call me or remember that I existed. The realization was both terrifying and liberating. I wasn't just Sarah's mother anymore. I was Martha, a 68-year-old woman with her own dreams and desires, and it was time to start living for myself. 2 weeks after that devastating phone call, I made a decision that would change everything. I was going to stop being Sarah's financial safety net. But first, I needed to understand exactly how much of my life and money I'd been pouring into a relationship that clearly meant nothing to her. I spent an entire Saturday going through 5 years of bank statements, credit card bills, and receipts. I spread everything out on my dining room table like evidence in a court case, because that's exactly what it felt like. I was building a case against my own naive generosity. The numbers were staggering. Beyond the major expenses I'd already calculated, there were hundreds of smaller transactions I'd forgotten about. The $200 I'd sent when Emma needed a costume for her school play, because Sarah claimed she was completely broke that week. The $500 for Jake's baseball equipment. The $200 for Sarah's root canal when she said their dental insurance wouldn't cover it. The $800 for their car repair after David's fender bender. Every time Sarah had called me in tears or panic, claiming it was an emergency, promising she'd pay me back when things got better. I'd never asked for the money back, never even mentioned it again. I'd told myself that's what family did. You helped each other without keeping score. But as I looked at those bank statements, I realized I was the only one helping. Sarah had never once offered to help me with anything. When my washing machine broke last year, I'd repaired it myself with YouTube videos rather than burden her with my problems. When I needed minor surgery on my shoulder, I'd taken the bus to the hospital because I didn't want to bother her during her busy week. The total amount I'd given Sarah over 5 years was $127,000. Nearly my entire inheritance from my parents, plus most of my savings from 40 years of working as a nurse. I'd essentially funded her comfortable lifestyle while denying myself basic pleasures like dinner out or new clothes that weren't from discount stores. That Monday, I called my bank and made an appointment with a financial advisor. Margaret Foster was a woman about my age who listened without judgment as I explained my situation. "Mrs. Henderson," she said gently after reviewing my finances, "you've been very generous with your daughter, but you need to think about your own security now. At 68, you should be protecting your retirement funds, not depleting them." "I know," I said, feeling foolish. I just kept thinking that if I helped her now, she'd be able to help me later if I needed it. Margaret's expression was kind, but direct. "Based on what you've told me about your relationship, do you really believe that's going to happen?" Her question hit me like a physical blow because I knew the answer. No, Sarah wouldn't help me if I needed it. She'd probably suggest I ask Linda and Robert for assistance or remind me that I should have planned better for my retirement. "What do you recommend?" I asked. "First, you need to stop all financial support immediately. No more emergency loans, no more bailouts. Second, you need to secure your remaining assets. Set up a trust, update your will, make sure your money is protected." I left the bank feeling both empowered and terrified. For the first time in years, I was going to prioritize my own financial future over Sarah's immediate wants. That evening, Sarah called me, not to check on my well-being or share something about her life, but because she needed money again. "Mom, I hate to ask, but we're in a real bind," she said, her voice taking on that familiar, desperate tone that always made me reach for my checkbook. "Emma needs braces, and our insurance is only covering half. We need about $4,000 to get started, and the orthodontist wants payment up front. In the past, I would have immediately agreed, maybe even offered to pay the full amount to save her the worry. But this time I took a deep breath and said something I'd never said before. "I'm sorry, Sarah, but I can't help you with that." Silence on the other end of the line. Then, "What do you mean you can't help? Are you having money problems?" "No, I'm not having money problems. I'm just not going to keep funding your family's expenses." "Funding our expenses?" Her voice rose, taking on an edge I didn't like. "Mom, this is for your granddaughter's medical care. How can you be so selfish?" Selfish. The word hit me like a slap. After decades of sacrifice, after giving her everything I had, she was calling me selfish for finally setting a boundary. "Sarah, in the past 5 years, I've given you over $120,000. You've never paid back a single dollar, never even offered to. I think I've been generous enough." "You've been keeping track?" she asked, her voice cold with disbelief. "I can't believe you've been keeping score of money you gave to your own daughter." "You're right," I said calmly. "I should have been keeping better track. Maybe then I would have realized sooner that I was being taken advantage of." "Taken advantage of? Mom, everything you gave us was because you offered. We never forced you to give us anything." Technically, she was right. I had offered, but every offer had come in response to her tearful calls about emergencies and desperate situations. I'd offered because I loved her and wanted to help, not because I wanted to subsidize a lifestyle she couldn't afford. "What about Linda and Robert?" I asked. Surely they could help with Emma's braces. Another silence. Then, "I can't ask them for money, Mom. That would be inappropriate, but you can ask me? You're my mother. It's different. And there it was, laid bare. I was her mother when she needed money, but Linda was her dream parent when she wanted emotional support and companionship. I was good enough to be her ATM, but not good enough to be her friend. Sarah, I'm not going to help you with the braces or any other expenses. You and David are going to have to figure this out on your own. Fine, she said, her voice ice cold. I guess I know where I stand with you now. She hung up without saying goodbye. I sat in my kitchen holding the phone, waiting for the guilt to wash over me the way it always did when I disappointed Sarah. But it never came. Instead, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: relief. For the first time in decades, I wasn't responsible for solving Sarah's problems. I wasn't her emergency fund or her backup plan. I was just Martha, a woman with her own life to live and her own money to protect. The next morning, I called Margaret Foster and scheduled another appointment. It was time to update my will. When I arrived at her office, I brought a folder full of documents I'd prepared. I want to make some changes, I told her. I want to remove my daughter as the primary beneficiary of my estate. Margaret didn't seem surprised. Who would you like to designate instead? I'd spent hours thinking about this. I want to set up a scholarship fund at the nursing school where I trained, for single mothers who want to become nurses but can't afford the tuition. That's a wonderful legacy, Margaret said, and I could see she meant it. As I signed the paperwork changing my will, I felt something I hadn't expected: peace. My money would go to women who would truly appreciate the opportunity, who would use it to build better lives for themselves and their children. Women who understood the value of hard work and sacrifice because they were living it every day. Women like I had been, before I'd spent decades pouring my life into someone who saw me only as a resource to be tapped when needed. 2 days later, I did something even more dramatic. I called a realtor and put my house on the market. The house had become a museum of my life with Sarah, filled with memories of a relationship that no longer existed. Every room held reminders of the daughter I'd raised and lost to people who could give her more than I ever could. It was time to let it go and start fresh somewhere else. Are you sure about this, Mrs. Henderson? Asked Janet, the realtor I'd chosen. This is a big decision. Where are you planning to move? I smiled, feeling more certain than I had about anything in years. I don't know yet. That's the exciting part. For the first time in my adult life, I was going to make decisions based solely on what I wanted, not on what would make me available to Sarah or convenient for her needs. I was going to discover who Martha was when she wasn't defined by being someone's mother. The house would sell quickly, Janet assured me. It was in a desirable neighborhood, well-maintained, and priced to move. Within a month, I could be anywhere I wanted to be, living any kind of life I chose to create. As Janet took photos of my living room, I looked around at the space where I'd waited alone on my birthday, where I'd spent so many evenings hoping Sarah would call, where I'd slowly realized that love wasn't always reciprocated no matter how freely you gave it. Soon, this would be someone else's home, someone else's gathering place, and I would be free to build a life that didn't revolve around waiting for crumbs of affection from someone who'd already chosen a different family to love. 3 weeks after putting the house on the market, I got an offer that was $15,000 above my asking price. The buyers wanted to close within 30 days, which meant I had exactly 1 month to pack up 40 years of my life and disappear from Sarah's world as completely as she'd disappeared from mine. I didn't tell her about the sale. I didn't tell her about changing my will or canceling the automatic transfers I'd been making to help with her mortgage payments. I simply stopped being available in the way I'd always been available before. When she called about Emma's braces again, I let it go to voicemail. When she texted asking if I could babysit Jake while she and David went to Linda's charity gala, I didn't respond. For the first time in my life as a mother, I chose silence over servitude. The house sold quickly, just as Janet had predicted. The buyers were a young couple with twins who reminded me of myself at that age. Hopeful, energetic, ready to fill those rooms with laughter and love. I felt good about passing the house to people who would appreciate it the way I once had. Packing was harder than I'd expected. Not because I was sad to leave, but because I kept finding evidence of how thoroughly I'd erased myself in favor of Sarah's needs. My closet was full of practical clothes in neutral colors because I'd spent years trying to look appropriate for her increasingly upscale social events. My kitchen drawers were stuffed with recipe cards for Sarah's favorite meals, dishes I'd perfected over decades of trying to show love through food. I found boxes of photo albums documenting every moment of Sarah's childhood, but almost no pictures of myself unless I was in the background, serving cake at her birthday parties or applauding at her school events. I'd been so focused on recording her life that I'd forgotten to live my own. The most painful discovery was a shoebox full of Mother's Day cards Sarah had made for me as a child. Hand-drawn pictures with crayon messages. I love you, Mommy. You're the best mom ever. I'm lucky you're my mom. The contrast between those innocent declarations and the woman who now called me selfish for refusing to fund her lifestyle was almost too much to bear. I kept one card from when she was 7 years old. She'd drawn a picture of us holding hands under a rainbow, with "My mom is my best friend," written in purple crayon across the top. I tucked it into my purse, not out of nostalgia, but as a reminder of what I'd lost and why I could never go back to being the woman who'd accepted crumbs and called them love. 2 weeks before closing, Sarah finally called me directly instead of leaving voicemails. "Mom, what's going on?" she demanded without preamble. "I've been trying to reach you for days. Linda said she drove past your house and saw a for sale sign. Please tell me you're not actually selling." I'd been dreading this conversation, but I was surprised by how calm I felt when it finally came. "Yes, I'm selling the house," I said simply. "Why? Where are you going to live? Why didn't you tell me you were even thinking about this?" The questions came rapid fire, and I could hear genuine panic in her voice. Not panic about my well-being, I realized, but panic about losing control of a situation she'd taken for granted. "I'm moving somewhere smaller," I said, which was true. "Somewhere more manageable for someone my age." "But Mom, this is our family home. This is where Emma and Jake come to visit you. You can't just sell it without discussing it with me. Our family home." Emma and Jake's visits. I almost laughed at the fiction she was creating. Emma and Jake had visited exactly 3 times in the past 2 years, and each visit had lasted less than an hour because they were always rushing off to more exciting activities with Linda and Robert. "Sarah, you haven't been to this house in 6 months. The children barely know where I live. I don't think my moving will impact your life at all." "That's not true. We were planning to spend more time there this summer. Linda and Robert are going to Europe for 2 months, so we thought maybe the kids could stay with you some weekends." There it was. There. They needed me again. Linda and Robert weren't available, so suddenly I was back in consideration as a babysitting option. Not because they wanted to spend time with me, but because their preferred childcare providers would be unavailable. "I won't be available for babysitting this summer," I said. "I have other plans." "What other plans?" "Mom, you never have plans." The casual cruelty of that statement took my breath away. You never have plans. As if my entire existence revolved around being available for her convenience, as if I had no life, no interests, no desires beyond serving her family's needs. "I'm going to be traveling," I said. "I've always wanted to see the country, and now I finally can." "Traveling? By yourself?" "Mom, that's dangerous at your age. You don't know anything about travel. At my age." As if 68 made me an invalid incapable of navigating the world alone. Linda was 72 and had just planned a 2-month European vacation. But somehow my wanting to see America made me a reckless old woman who didn't know her limitations. "I'll be fine, Sarah. I'm not asking for your approval or your permission." "Well, where are you moving? I need to know where you'll be living." For a moment, I considered telling her the truth, that I'd rented a beautiful apartment in Asheville, North Carolina, a place I'd always dreamed of visiting, where I knew no one and no one had any expectations of me, but something held me back. "I haven't decided yet," I lied. "I'm looking at several options." "Mom, this is crazy. You can't just disappear. What if there's an emergency? What if I need to reach you? What if I need to reach you?" Not, "What if you need help?" Or, "What if something happens to you?" Her concern was entirely about her own access to me, her ability to pull me back into service when required. "You have my cell phone number," I said. "That's not changing." "But what about all your stuff? Your furniture, your photos, all the family heirlooms?" I looked around at the boxes stacked in my living room, most of them labeled for donation or disposal. I'd kept very little, some clothes, a few books, and the wedding ring my husband had given me 43 years ago. Everything else was just stuff, accumulated over decades of trying to build a life that had ultimately been built on quicksand. "I'm keeping what matters to me," I said. "The rest is just things." "What about Emma and Jake? They love Grandma's house. How am I going to explain to them that you just got rid of everything without telling them?" Grandma's house. She'd never called it that before, never encouraged the children to think of it as a special place they belonged. But now that it was disappearing, suddenly it was a treasured family landmark that I was cruelly destroying. "You'll figure something out," I said. "You always do." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. When Sarah spoke again, her voice was different, harder, colder, with an edge I'd never heard directed at me before. "I don't understand what's gotten into you, Mom. Ever since your birthday, you've been acting strange, selfish. This isn't like you at all, selfish." There was that word again. I'd spent my entire adult life putting Sarah's needs before my own, and the moment I stopped, I became selfish in her eyes. Maybe this is exactly like me, I said quietly. Maybe you just never bothered to find out who I really was. What's that supposed to mean? I could have explained it to her then. I could have told her about the loneliness of being taken for granted, about the pain of watching her love someone else's parents more than she'd ever loved me, about the exhaustion of being valued only for what I could provide rather than who I was. But I knew she wouldn't understand. She'd never tried to understand me before. She wasn't going to start now. It means I'm going to live my life for myself from now on, I said. I hope you can respect that. And what about us? What about our relationship? Our relationship. As if we'd had a real relationship instead of a one-sided arrangement where I gave and she took, and we both pretended that was normal. What relationship, Sarah? I asked, and I heard her sharp intake of breath at the bluntness of my question. When was the last time you called me just to talk? When was the last time you asked about my life, my health, my feelings? When was the last time you treated me like a person instead of a resource? She was quiet for so long I thought she might have hung up. Finally, she said, I never know what to say to you, Mom. You never seemed interested in talking about yourself. Never seemed interested. I'd spent 43 years asking about her day, her problems, her dreams, her fears. I'd listened to thousands of hours of her complaints and celebrations, offered advice she rarely took and support she always expected. But I'd never seemed interested in talking about myself because she'd never seemed interested in listening. Well, I said, I guess that's something you won't have to worry about anymore. What do you mean? I mean I won't be bothering you with calls you don't want to take or visits you don't have time for. You can focus on your real family now. Mom, you are my real family. But even as she said it, I could hear the hollowness in her voice. We both knew it wasn't true. I was her biological family, her legal family, her obligatory family. But Linda and Robert were the family of her heart, the people she turned to when she needed comfort or celebration or companionship. I hope you'll be very happy with Linda and Robert, I said. And I meant it. They clearly give you everything you need. Mom, please don't do this. Don't disappear from our lives. I know things haven't been perfect between us, but we can work on them. Work on them. As if our relationship was a project that needed tweaking, rather than a fundamental imbalance that had left me emptied out and invisible in my own daughter's life. Take care of yourself, Sarah, I said. Give my love to Emma and Jake. I hung up before she could respond. And for the first time in weeks, my phone didn't ring again. 6 months later, I was sitting on the balcony of my apartment in Asheville, North Carolina, watching the sunset over the Blue Ridge Mountains with a cup of coffee in my hands and a sense of peace I hadn't felt in decades. The apartment was small but perfect. 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom, a kitchen just big enough for me, and windows that looked out over rolling hills instead of the suburban street where I'd spent years watching for Sarah's car that rarely came. The move had been easier than I'd expected. I'd hired a company to handle everything, and within a week of closing on the house, I was unpacked and settled in a place where no one knew me as Sarah's mother, or David's mother-in-law, or anyone's anything. I was just Martha, a woman starting over at 68. I'd changed my phone number and given the new one to only a handful of people. My doctor, my lawyer, and my bank. I kept my old phone for a while, watching as Sarah's calls and texts became increasingly frantic, then angry, then sporadic, then finally stopped altogether. Each stage felt like shedding another layer of skin that no longer fit. The first few weeks had been challenging, not because I missed my old life, but because I had to learn how to live without constantly anticipating someone else's needs. I'd catch myself checking my phone for messages that didn't matter anymore, or cooking enough dinner for 2 out of 40 years of habit. But slowly, beautifully, I began to remember who I was when I wasn't defined by disappointment and obligation. I joined a hiking group for seniors and discovered muscles I'd forgotten I had. I took a pottery class and found I had steady hands and patience for shaping clay into something beautiful. I volunteered at the local literacy center, helping adults learn to read, and remembered why I'd loved teaching before I'd become consumed with being needed rather than useful. Most surprisingly, I made friends. Real friends, not people who tolerated me because I was related to someone they actually liked. There was Eleanor, a retired librarian who shared my love of mystery novels and had a wicked sense of humor about her own children's shortcomings. There was Grace, a former teacher who'd also moved to Asheville to escape the obligations of being everyone's solution to every problem. And there was Betty, who'd left California after her son's new wife made it clear that his mother was no longer welcome in their tidy new life. We met for coffee twice a week and discovered we all had similar stories. Women who'd given everything to children who'd grown up to prefer other people's versions of family. We didn't spend our time complaining or feeling sorry for ourselves. Instead, we planned adventures and shared books and learned to laugh about our liberation rather than mourn our losses. 3 months into my new life, I did something I'd dreamed about since I was a young nurse working double shifts to pay for Sarah's everything. I bought a plane ticket to Italy. Not a sensible, budget-conscious trip, but a 2-week tour of Tuscany that cost more than I'd ever spent on myself at one time. I'd never been on a plane before, never been outside the United States, never done anything that felt purely selfish and wonderful. But as I sat in that airplane window seat watching America disappear below me, I felt something I'd almost forgotten existed. Anticipation for my own happiness. Italy was everything I'd imagined and more. I walked through vineyards in the golden morning light, ate pasta with wine at lunch without worrying about anyone's schedule but my own, and stood in museums staring at art that had been created centuries before my problems existed and would remain beautiful long after they were forgotten. On my last night in Florence, I sat at a sidewalk cafe watching people walk by, families and couples and solo travelers like myself, all living their own stories without needing my input or assistance. I pulled out my phone and almost called Sarah to share this moment with her. Then I remembered that she was probably at Linda and Robert's lake house for the weekend, posting photos of their perfect family gatherings while I sat half a world away, learning to be happy alone. I put my phone back in my purse and ordered another glass of wine instead. When I returned to Asheville, I found a stack of mail that had been forwarded from my old address. Most of it was junk, but buried in the middle was a handwritten envelope with Sarah's return address. My heart started beating faster before I could stop it. Old habits of hope dying hard. Inside was a single sheet of paper with Sarah's careful handwriting. "Mom, I know you don't want to hear from me, but I need you to know that Emma is asking for you. She wants to know why Grandma Martha doesn't love her anymore. I don't know what to tell her. Linda and Robert are wonderful, but they're not her real grandmother. Please call me. We can work this out." I read the letter 3 times, waiting for the guilt to crash over me the way it always had before. But it never came. Instead, I felt a clear, cold anger at Sarah's manipulation. She couldn't reach me through appeals to our relationship, so now she was using Emma as leverage, trying to make me feel responsible for a situation Sarah herself had created. Emma asking for me was probably true. Children loved unconditionally until they were taught not to. But Emma was 7 years old, and children her age adapted quickly to new realities. In 6 months, she'd barely remember the grandmother who'd disappeared from her life, because she'd been mostly absent from it anyway. What Sarah couldn't accept was that I'd finally stopped playing the role she'd assigned me. I wasn't the desperate, always available mother anymore, the one who would sacrifice anything to maintain even the thinnest connection to her daughter. I was Martha, a woman who'd discovered that life was bigger and more interesting than waiting for someone to need her. I wrote back, something I'd never thought I'd have the strength to do. "Sarah, I hope Emma is well and happy. I hope you all are. I've built a new life for myself, one where I'm valued for who I am rather than what I can provide. I wish you the best, but I won't be coming back. Please don't contact me again." I mailed it the next day and felt lighter with every step away from the post office. That evening, Eleanor called to invite me to a book club meeting where they'd be discussing a novel about women who'd reinvented themselves later in life. Grace had found a new hiking trail she wanted to explore on Saturday. Betty had tickets to a concert she thought I'd enjoy. My calendar was full of activities I'd chosen, with people who appreciated my company without expecting me to solve their problems or fund their dreams. I had money in my savings account again, money that belonged to me and would stay mine until I decided how to spend it on things that brought me joy rather than temporary gratitude from someone who saw me as an obligation. 6 months ago, I'd been a woman whose daughter sent her a gas station magnet for her birthday, and then spent the day posting about her dream parents on social media. Now I was a woman who'd seen the Sistine Chapel, who could throw a decent pot on a pottery wheel, who had friends who called just to chat and included her in their plans because they enjoyed her company. The transformation hadn't happened overnight, and it hadn't happened without moments of doubt and loneliness, but it had happened completely. I wasn't the same person who'd sat in that empty house wondering what was wrong with her that her own daughter preferred strangers. I was someone who'd learned that sometimes the greatest gift you can give yourself is the courage to stop accepting less than you deserve. Sarah would be fine. She had Linda and Robert, who could give her everything she wanted without expecting anything meaningful in return. She had David and the children and a life that had never really included me anyway. My absence from that life wouldn't create a void because I'd never truly filled a space that mattered. But I would be more than fine. I would be free and happy and surrounded by people who saw me as a complete person rather than a convenient resource. I would travel and learn and laugh and live without constantly measuring my worth by someone else's level of satisfaction with what I provided. As I sat on my balcony that night, looking out at mountains that existed independent of anyone's need or approval, I realized I'd stopped waiting for Sarah to love me the way I'd always loved her. Instead, I'd finally learned to love myself enough to build a life worth living, with or without her in it. 1 year and 3 months after I'd disappeared from Sarah's life, she found me. Not through any detective work or persistent searching, but through the kind of accident that makes you believe the universe has a sense of timing, if not humor. I was having lunch with Eleanor at a small cafe in downtown Asheville when I heard a familiar voice behind me ordering a latte with extra foam. My entire body went cold before my mind even processed what was happening. I turned around slowly, hoping I was wrong, but there she was, Sarah, looking older and somehow smaller than I remembered, standing at the counter of the Mountain View Cafe wearing expensive jeans and a designer jacket that probably cost more than my monthly rent. She hadn't seen me yet, so I had a moment to study her while she waited for her order. She looked tired in a way that expensive makeup couldn't quite hide. There were lines around her eyes that hadn't been there before, and her hands trembled slightly as she checked her phone. She looked like a woman carrying weight she couldn't quite manage, though I couldn't tell if it was emotional or something else entirely. Eleanor, who knew my story as well as anyone, followed my gaze and immediately understood. "Do you want to leave?" she whispered. I considered it. The old Martha would have fled, would have hidden in the bathroom until Sarah left, would have done anything to avoid the confrontation that was surely coming. But I wasn't the old Martha anymore. I was a woman who'd hiked 14 miles through mountain trails the week before, who'd learned to speak basic Italian, who'd discovered she had a talent for watercolor painting and a gift for making people laugh with stories about her adventures. "No," I said quietly. "I'm not running anymore." Sarah turned around with her latte in hand, scanning the cafe for a place to sit, and our eyes met across the crowded room. For a moment, neither of us moved. She looked like she'd seen a ghost, which in many ways she had. I was the ghost of her old life. The mother she'd discarded, who'd somehow materialized in a place she'd never expected to find her. I watched her face cycle through emotions: shock, guilt, something that might have been relief, and finally determination. She made her way over to my table, weaving between chairs and other diners like a woman walking toward her own execution. "Mom," she said when she reached us, her voice barely above a whisper, "I can't believe it's really you." "Hello, Sarah," I said calmly, taking a sip of my coffee. "This is my friend Eleanor. Eleanor, this is my daughter Sarah." Eleanor, bless her, stood up gracefully. "I think I'll leave you two to talk," she said, gathering her purse. She squeezed my shoulder gently as she passed, a small gesture of support that meant more to me than Sarah would ever understand. Sarah slid into Eleanor's vacated chair without invitation, setting her latte down with shaking hands. Up close, I could see she'd been crying recently. Her eyes were red-rimmed and slightly puffy despite her careful makeup. "You look good, Mom," she said, and I could hear the surprise in her voice. "You look different. Younger somehow." I did look different. I'd lost weight from all the hiking and healthy eating, gained color from spending time outdoors, and started wearing clothes that I actually liked instead of practical beige things chosen to blend into the background of other people's lives. My hair was shorter and lighter, styled by a woman in Asheville who'd convinced me that gray could be beautiful instead of something to hide. "I feel different," I said honestly. "I've been looking for you," she said, her voice taking on that familiar, desperate edge. "I hired a private investigator. I've called every hospital in a 100-mile radius. I thought you might be dead." "I'm very much alive," I said, "just not available to you anymore." She flinched as if I'd slapped her. "Mom, I know you're angry with me. I know I made mistakes, but we're family. We can work through this." Family. Work through this. The same words she'd used in our last phone conversation, as if our relationship was a minor misunderstanding that could be resolved with a few apologies and a promise to do better. "What are you doing in Asheville, Sarah?" I asked, changing the subject. She looked uncomfortable. "Linda and Robert bought a vacation house here. We're visiting for a long weekend. I never imagined I'd run into you." Of course, even her presence in my new city was connected to Linda and Robert, the people who'd replaced me in every meaningful way in her life. "How convenient for you," I said. "Mom, please, I need to explain. Things have been difficult since you left." "What kind of difficult?" She took a shaky breath. "David lost his job 6 months ago. The company downsized, and he was one of the first to go. We're behind on the mortgage, and Emma does need those braces. The orthodontist says if we wait much longer, the problems will be much more expensive to fix." I waited for her to continue, but she seemed to expect some kind of response from me. When none came, she pressed on. "Linda and Robert helped for a while, but Robert had some investment losses, and they've had to cut back. They can't support us the way they used to. I know I hurt you, Mom. I know I took you for granted. But I need you to help us. I need my mother back. And there it was. The real reason she'd been looking for me. The desperation I'd seen in her face when she recognized me. She didn't miss me. She missed what I could provide. She didn't want her mother back. She wanted her ATM back. So Linda and Robert can't help you anymore. And suddenly you remember you have a mother, I said. It's not like that. What's it like then, Sarah? I've missed you, she said, tears starting to form in her eyes. Emma asks about you all the time. Jake drew you a picture for Christmas, and when I told him I didn't know how to send it to you, he cried, they need their grandmother. The tears looked real, but I'd learned something important in my year of freedom. Tears didn't always mean truth. Sometimes they just meant someone was finally experiencing consequences for their choices. Where are Emma and Jake now? I asked. They're at Linda and Robert's house with David. We thought it would be better if I came to look for you alone. You mean you didn't want them to see you begging for money from the grandmother you taught them to forget? Sarah's face crumpled. I never taught them to forget you. I thought Linda and Robert could give them more, better opportunities, a better life than I had growing up. And what was wrong with the life you had growing up? Nothing was wrong with it, she said quickly. But you were always struggling, always worried about money. I wanted my children to have security. Security. As if love wasn't security. As if knowing your mother would sacrifice anything for you wasn't the most secure feeling a child could have. So you chose people who could give your children material security over the grandmother who would have given them unconditional love. I thought they could have both. I thought you'd always be there no matter what. You thought you could treat me however you wanted, and I'd always be available when you needed me. She didn't deny it, which was answer enough. I looked at this woman sitting across from me, this stranger who shared my DNA but not my values, who'd spent years taking everything I offered while giving nothing meaningful in return. I felt something I hadn't expected to feel. Pity. Sarah, I said gently, I want you to listen to me very carefully. I'm not coming back. I'm not going to help you financially, and I'm not going to be your backup plan when Linda and Robert can't give you what you want. But Emma and Jake will be fine. Children are resilient, and they adapt to the adults in their lives choose to prioritize. You chose to prioritize Linda and Robert. Now you get to live with that choice. I was wrong, she said, crying openly now. I was stupid and selfish and wrong, but I'm your daughter. Doesn't that mean anything to you? I looked at her tear-streaked face and felt nothing but a sad kind of peace. You stopped being my daughter when you decided Linda was your dream mother, I said. You can't claim that relationship back just because you need it now. So that's it? You're just going to abandon your own grandchildren because you're mad at me? I'm not abandoning anyone, Sarah. I'm choosing not to be used anymore. There's a difference. I stood up, gathering my purse and jacket. Sarah grabbed my arm as I started to walk away. Mom, please, I'll do anything. I'll cut contact with Linda and Robert if that's what you want. I'll make it up to you. I gently removed her hand from my arm. I don't want you to cut contact with anyone, Sarah. I want you to be happy. But I also want you to understand that happiness built on using other people is temporary. Eventually, everyone stops being willing to be used. Where are you going? How can I reach you? You can't, I said simply. This is goodbye, Sarah. For real this time. I walked out of the cafe and into the bright North Carolina sunshine, leaving my daughter crying at a table surrounded by strangers. I didn't look back, didn't hesitate, didn't feel the crushing guilt I would have felt a year ago. Instead, I felt free. Free from the hope that had kept me trapped for so long. Free from the fantasy that Sarah would someday value me for who I was rather than what I could provide. Free from the obligation to keep pouring myself into someone who saw me as a resource rather than a person. Eleanor was waiting for me by my car, having anticipated that I might need a friend when the conversation ended. How do you feel? She asked. I thought about it for a moment, taking inventory of my emotions. Sad, I said finally, but not for the reasons I expected. I'm sad for Sarah because she's going to spend the rest of her life looking for people to solve her problems instead of learning to solve them herself. I'm sad for Emma and Jake because they'll grow up thinking love is conditional on what you can provide. But I'm not sad for me anymore. We drove back to my apartment in comfortable silence, past the mountains that had become my home, toward the life I'd built from scratch at an age when most people thought adventure was behind them. I'd learned something important in that cafe. Closure doesn't always come from forgiveness or reconciliation. Sometimes it comes from finally accepting that some relationships aren't worth saving, no matter how much history you share or how badly you want them to be different. That evening, I sat on my balcony watching the sunset paint the mountains purple and gold, thinking about the woman I'd been a year ago and the woman I'd become. I'd lost a daughter, but I'd found myself. I'd given up the hope of being loved by someone who'd never really known how to love me, but I'd discovered I was worthy of love from people who appreciated me exactly as I was. My phone rang, and I saw Eleanor's name on the screen. "How are you holding up?" she asked. "I'm okay," I said, and meant it completely. I'm actually better than okay. I'm free, and for the first time in my adult life, I truly was.